Thank you so much for joining today's podcast, and we have a very special guest, Joerg Kreisel. Joerg is very well known in the space industry because for nearly 3 decades, Joerg has been specializing in technology commercialization, focused on innovative and commercial activities related to the space sector. He currently also holds stakes in several space-related startups around the globe. After pursuing a first career in space business, he became venture capitalist in early 90s. Joerg served as a board member of several high-tech startups and investor boards, has been involved with new business creation in space arena around the world. He is Associate Fellow of AIAA, as well as founding member of Entrepreneurship and Investment Committee. Also, Associate Editor of the New Space Journal. He holds a degree in aerospace engineering from RWTH Aachen University in Germany and is an early alumni of ISU International Space University. He also acted as a lecturer at different universities since 1990 and is a frequent speaker in international events. His profile is very different from our previous speakers who are more come from academy and from scientific background. And he is actually active in the space investment for the past 3 decades. So I really can't wait to invite our guests on and let's have a very inside chat on what has transformed in the past 3 decades in space. Thank you. Hey Joerg, it's so great to have you. I'm super excited because your profile is just so different from any of our previous speakers like Dr. Phil Metzger, Dr. Zuberin, Dr. Dan Britt. They all come from academy side and on the scientific side. And you have been one of the first advocator in the space industry and space economy. So I just can't wait to hear all the insights. Maybe let's jump start in. How's that sound?
Well, I think looking at the commercialization and industry of space, it's helpful to understand where all this comes from in terms of commercialization. Space commercialization actually started fairly early in the 70s and was for a long time dominated by satellite telecommunications and TV and so forth. So that dominated and accounted for around about 85% or even 90% in the early years of all commercial revenues generated by the space industry for a long time. Then later, throughout the 80s, one had new hopes and was looking into commercializing outcomes of microgravity research, looking into hypersonics, these type of things. Throughout the 1980s, and which later on then turned out to be sort of overestimates in terms of commercial potential. Not because it was not realistic, it was probably the timing not right, and by now we can do many things. We've just seen nowadays hypersonics coming back in different flavors, and now we can do those things. And then the 90s, that decade was pretty much characterized by the big LEOs, the big low Earth orbit constellations. So what we see today, satellite constellations in low Earth orbit rather than in geo orbit. And exploitation of satellite data in terms of Earth observation and remote sensing. Another thing was exploration and some other fancy stuff, all the way from bringing resources from the moon like helium-3, lunar billboards, space billboards, artificial moons and stuff like this.
That's already in the 90s.
Seen at the end, yes, and we have seen basically throughout the last 25 years of the last decade, phases of creativity and a new next-gen type space business, which at the end of the day didn't really become a reality and were overestimated. But now timing is getting right. Computer power is coming in. We can do many things. Technology has advanced. Space access costs have come down. Miniaturization has progressed. We have markets. We have new investors. We have more business acumen in the industry. So many factors around. All what it takes to build a commercial business is about coming together. And that really changes the world. And and earlier this century, the privatization of state-owned, government-owned satellite operators like Inmarsat by famous private equity groups, Apax, Permira, put really space on the map with huge multiples in big business. And last but not least, now we're talking about this on a common basis. The X Prize has basically paved the way and really brought space to the public. That was all supported by the trend of technology consumerization throughout the 90s. And then, of course, with the new media and internet, and now we're talking social media more recently, which really brought the public and many new space to the public and many new players into space. And so we're talking about new space for a while, and that is really tangible, and we see a real development, an explosion of activities since around about 2015. Before there were occasional activities, but since then we're really in a new age.
And I think 2015, that is also the time where US had these space law basically start to protecting the private ownership, right? And I think that is definitely a turning point. And then with reusable rocket, like what you just said, that it's like make the transportation possible. So that's where we see another turning point. And that's right now, like what you said, in 9 days, they already paved out the way. But because this turning point that really made where right now is possible, it's like huge momentum in the space industry.
Well, I think that's right, but it's not only the US. I think you're hitting on a very, very important point, which is the legal and regulatory environment to conduct and exploit space activities in a commercial way, because we have numerous legal frameworks and treaties and things in place, but looking at it from a commercial exploitation perspective, there's still a couple of white dots and a few things which we are lacking, which are where the space world is working on to getting those shortfalls kind of addressed. So space law is certainly an important thing for private sector. So is all the international regulation. And then, of course, space is defined, as the ISU, the International Space University, says, by the 3 I's, which means international, interdisciplinary, and intercultural. So if it's international, which many space businesses are, then, of course, the legal framework has to take into consideration that multiple countries and commercial actors with different nationalities coming from different jurisdictions have to work together. So that is where we yet have work in progress, but I'm confident that is being solved within an overseeable time frame, whereas time frames in the space arena not really short. It may take another 5 to 10 years to have this really worked out, but there is pressure and an awareness that has to be addressed.
Thank you. Thank you for walking us through that the history of the space commercialization. And it is actually quite surprising. A lot of ideas and technology we are talking about now, they were already in discussion in 9 days. But probably at that time, a lot of ideas way ahead of curve. And it's only start to be much, much more real now. And I just wonder, as one of the first advocator for space, at that time, I mean, what did you see that other people missed? What brought you so focused on space, like literally 3 decades ago?
Well, actually, I was not the only one. There was a number of people, but it was we were talking things which were not really taken up by the old guard infrastructure, so because the sector, for good reasons, has been organized and run based on technological and programmatic lines. This is because it's coming from the space race and then government-funded science and other programs. So there was a good reason to have things set up the way they've been set up. So to the most part, people were coming from that environment. It was technocrat and government-driven activities, and there's nothing wrong with that. We're still doing this, and we should keep doing those things. But it opened opportunities for private sector and for entrepreneurs. And there were a number of people kind of talking about this when the term space commercialization wasn't really existing at the time. In the 80s, nobody used the term. It only came around 1990, 1991. That is when that term became more frequently used. So what did we see what other people didn't see? I think there's always a good and a bad thing about these things. So we saw this an opportunity and a necessity for space to open up for entrepreneurship and commercial activities. However, we missed totally out on the fact that timing wasn't right and the environment would not allow such a switch. So it took quite a while for space entrepreneurship to prosper. But there were always good activities. So I'm not saying that the community was blind. No, it was addressed. There were entrepreneurship and finance courses and activities by the agencies throughout the 90s. All this happened, but it took a long time to get the momentum built.
So it required a lot of patience and a lot of foresight. And thank you for, the group people like yourself have been continued to pushing so we can see the prospects of a space economy now. So thank you very much on that. And so the space ecosystem, we're really talking about from literally the launch to the satellite, to space station, to space manufacturing. It's a long ecosystem. Can you just give our listener a little bit, introduction on where the ecosystem are and which part of ecosystem is your particular focus now?
Well, I think that is very, very important point because first of all, space ecosystem is a buzzword which is around the industry for the last 3 years. Before nobody talked space ecosystem. And it makes sense to look at it from an ecosystem's perspective. But that ecosystem is not a kind of a ecosystem per se. It has to be looked at in different ways. Because when we are talking space, we are talking about access to space, which covers everything around launchers. We are talking about orbital systems or other deep space or exploration systems which go beyond orbit. So from a technology and system perspective, we are talking launchers, satellites, probes, space stations, these type of things, and then robotic exploitation means rovers for Moon, Mars, and beyond. Just by mentioning this, you may understand that it is a rather complex thing, and those systems have to work in the harsh environment of space. That, by nature and by definition, requires superior technologies to sustain and to operate in this environment. So there is a high entry barrier with regards to technology making things work. That's technology. Nowadays, I would tend to say we can do everything. We can do everything. There's no technological limitations anymore. Now, when we're talking about the ecosystem, we are talking, we have to look at what are the markets to be addressed by what, who does what for whom. So in turn, we are moving away from the perspective of technological and programmatic lines all the way from systems, subsystems, components, and these type of things, and not even speaking about ground system and other things. If we looked at it from a commercial perspective, we would be well advised to try to distinguish between the different business natures, the risk levels, funding needs, timeframes for realization, and market specifics, and so forth. So then we have a totally different setup of the industry. Right? So we have core space activities where we go upstream, and we build the systems to do something in space or for people on Earth. We have satellite exploitation in terms of downstream application ICT of satellite data, which is more blended into the terrestrial economy, except for the space system. As for the rest, it's not space business in a way, to simplify. So we have many different ways of looking at it. So where is historically seen, where is a major difference of space business in general, but that view is a bit too simplistic, is we are talking about a business with massive upfront investment and long lead times. So that set is probably too simple because nowadays we're having companies which have near-term market potential. The funding needs have come down, and we have many, many more players. So there is a certain, let's say, professionalization taking place in terms of the commercialization. And with many, many more players, a lot of people from the outside having been successful in setting up business in other parts of the industry rather than space. So the space ecosystem really breaks down into those things. So we're talking technology, we're talking about the markets, the entrepreneurs, but also all the support structures. We were earlier addressing legal regulatory, but we're also talking insurance. We're talking all the kind of things which you need for any type of business. However, there are some specifics with regard when it comes to space, which cannot be just kind of like copied from other sectors. There's some space-specific things, and there's a couple of very normal, straightforward, down-to-earth business considerations.
So there are many different ways to segment the ecosystem. So there is based on the technology, based on the commercial readiness, based on if it's scalable, based on if the downstream, upstream is a bit more mature. So, okay. And I thought at one point that it was more segment like space for Earth, space for space, and the deep space. And that was my way of simplification of the different segment. But as you said, it's much, much more complex than that. So that brings to my next question. And at which segment are you most bullish on for the space? Is that, I guess, not launch things, it's very, very crowded already.
Well, that's true. I mean, first of all, to catch up on your previous comment, I think, yes, the ecosystem, and then we need to look into the stakeholders, and the ecosystem varies depending on where you are, in which region, in which sector you're acting. You know, I mean, in some areas, the government entities are more involved and necessary to be involved. We have all today funding schemes, government, private sector. We have accelerators. We have many other things happening. So in this way, the ecosystem is no such simple ecosystem. There is a space ecosystem, which then comes in different flavors depending on the sector and where you are. And you mentioned the launch. It's not a launch segment because the launch segment is crowded. Yes, it is. We have many launcher companies these days, and and the market can only deal with a few. So there is a consolidation in the making, and we will see what's going to happen. However, there is even opportunities related to launchers because a rocket, by definition, the physics is rather stable, and that's what we know. But there is different ways of addressing it. So some rockets and some commercial models make more sense than others, or have at least certain competitive advantages. Coming to where I see the future and what I believe, what I'm very interested in. To me, clearly, the next big thing for space is future space infrastructure and associated logistics. And what does that mean? We have that, but in the future it's going to change. We are about building more and bigger systems in space, and the way we build things today is in some sort of based on traditional design philosophies, in a one-of-a-kind way, in a throwaway system type of philosophy. And that has to change for several reasons. Certainly, we want to be more sustainable. We want to deal better with our resources, but also from a commercial and operational flexibility perspective. We want to build system, and we have to build system in the future, which are more cautious with use of resources, but also maintain a certain way to adjust systems as requirements and boundary conditions change. What does that mean? Like, we will have systems in the future which we assemble in orbit, will be serviced and operated and maintained and maybe repurposed, adjusted, extended, you name it, as we move forward. So that in turn means the new trend and part of the US future strategy for space, ISAM, which stands for In Space, Servicing, Assembly and Manufacturing, is really the next big thing. So you can imagine we go either to orbit or to deep space, or we go on the celestial bodies, or we go any place in space. We would probably move to a new design where we have cooperative design, where we can send stuff for bigger systems in smaller chunks to space, assemble it. If something goes wrong, we change it. If you do these type of things, both in space as well as on-site planets, or when you exploit resources on asteroids or in celestial bodies, you want to be efficient. And you want to be, let's say, flexible, because we don't know all of these type of things. And we will learn as we move forward, and we can probably not afford building a new thing all the time as we learn. So we need cooperative design. We will build systems which in the future will be based on plug and play. Sort of Lego in space. There's many people working on these type of things, and robotics will play a big role. AI. And what we see alongside these developments with the upcoming commercialization of low Earth orbits, with all these constellations with many satellites, just look at Starlink and others, we have entered already a phase of space industrialization. And that stands for, contrary to what we did in the past, that stands for same parts principle, series production, maybe mass manufacturing, etc. So that means what I'm bullish at is there is a lot of opportunities. Just keep in mind that we build things many times. At the subsystem and component level, there is tremendous opportunities, because here we're talking economy of scale effects. And we will use certain parts more and more, all the way to building blocks and these type of things. So it's a huge paradigm shift in the making. And we will see this reflected by many systems in the future, not so far from now.
Very interesting. So for you, the segment is space infrastructure and space transportation, and the
logistics between those systems. Yeah,
absolutely. So when you look at the technology, what excites you most is the technology in terms the revolutionize, or it's in terms the commercial readiness? I mean, what is weighing more? Or on the other hand, or I turn the question around, is more like, I want to understand how is your selection process for which company to invest, or what technology to help to commercialization?
If I were to invest in some of those companies. So you mentioned technology, which is important. So is there new technology? Yeah. Yes, there's always new technology, but I do not think that we need a lot of kind of breakthrough new technologies. We can do basically a lot with the technologies we have, and with the incremental improvements we see all across the board. It's more about a smart combination of those technologies into smart systems. And we will even see new kind of systems, as well as capabilities, which then require a very sophisticated, or we see this even now, smart combination of technology and business matters. And all the way to entirely new services. We're already talking about satellite as a service. We will see maybe connection as a service in the future. So everything along those lines, and particularly robotics enhanced by AI, and building block type businesses will change the world in space. When I mentioned earlier, future space infrastructure and logistics into elements like we find them in computers or in the App Store today. So where there is a developer environment and people can contribute functionalities into such building blocks, similar to an app store. And then everybody can pick the right pieces. And since those people can come from in and out, we can work with new players and enhance space systems per se, but also increase efficiency. And that is what then at the end of the day boils down to commercial effectiveness and feasibility. Right, so I think we have a lot of improvements. We see same parts principle, economy of scale effects, and so forth.
So how do you select companies. So you more look at a commercial readiness. That's, I think, what I understand.
Yes, but also, and here comes the trick, I think. So I'm myself, I'm not really a big investor. I usually work with people who come talk to me, and then I'm involved from scratch with the business. But I'm also advising numerous investors related to space. And what is very interesting is. Of course, there is a sort of an investment due diligence. You know, you look at certain things, and that is just a normal Bible and a textbook of business plans and due diligence. Beyond that, for space, it takes something else. I'm personally a believer that one has to understand the heritage of the technologies involved and the people involved. In space, it's very special. And there are technologies and systems and environments and even the nursing institutions which have worked on things which sometimes work technically, never worked commercially. Some technologies have been overestimated over many, many years. So it takes for space, since this is a small family and community, it takes really understanding all the background to this, the background of the soft factors. And I would advise every space-related investors to do good job on homework in this respect, because a lot of people lost money and counted on the wrong businesses because they were missing out on this homework. And so that is a more general of an advice, and I can only re-emphasize there is no such straightforward space business assessment. It really takes, given the broad variety of sectors, systems, disciplines, and so forth, it really takes a case-by-case approach.
Got you. So it is really important to have an overall understanding of the use case and how the business add value, right? Because that is really very, very important part as well. Cool. And as you know, that I come from the mining background, and that will be my favorite topic to talk about, space mining. What is your view on this new segment in the space, that is space exploration, space resources, and particularly in terms asteroid mining as well as lunar mining? What do you think, will it happen within our generation?
Well, I think so first of all, the sector is now prominent. So space resources, asteroid mining, and these types of things. So basically the exploitation of resources in space or in the celestial body in the solar system. That actually is not new, right? So people looked at it for decades, but didn't really approach it in making it real. So this is happening more over the last couple of years. So what hasn't changed, though, is we are talking about missions and systems which are rather broad. They take a while. They require a lot of resources to get going. And so typically they exceed normal holding periods of investors. And here is a problem. But that can be solved in a way that, so on the way to build space resource business or exploitation business, to generate value as you move forward, to allow and bring in additional investors as certain milestones are being reached. This is totally independent from the technology roadmap system development milestones, but those are the business finance plans milestones, where a certain value is to be generated. And I think some people can do this. So that is at the microeconomic level, talking about a company that wants to exploit a certain resource in space.
Yeah.
If we looked at it from a more macroeconomic perspective, then this company or several of those, hopefully, because it needs competition, I think they will need a marketplace to trade the resources they exploit, in order to building the ecosystem, another ecosystem about space resources. The risk would be more diversified, and it would really help also on the financing side. And one could kind of buffer and go along the volatility or the waves of the terrestrial trading business. So I think that is yet not well reflected when looking at a number of those, and there's quite a few of those space exploration companies. It's a long shot thing. I'm confident it can be managed, but there has to be a bottom-up approach by providing the closing the gaps with legal regulatory questions, but also bringing in the market. The market the trading platform or the market, whatever you name it, the marketplace.
Yeah.
And so that needs to go together. So then we will have a number X of players doing the resource business, and then we have millions of dealing with it, and in the middle is the marketplace. And I think that has to come.
Got you. So you have raised very, very interesting points. It's not technology alone. It's actually the entire supporting system, right? How we value the resource. Are we going to bring back? Are we going to use there? And how are we going to use there? How are we going to value? I mean, otherwise it's just very, very difficult to even making progress on the supply chain, right? So it is a very, very relevant point. Do you think that actual ecosystem is slowly maturing?